The air was thick with the scent of magnolias and regret the summer I turned 16, the kind of heat that pressed against your skin like a confession you weren't ready to make. I stood on the porch of our crumbling shotgun house in Edenville, South Carolina, watching the dust settle on the road where Daddy's truck had just disappeared. He hadn't looked back, not once. The screen door creaked behind me, and Mama's voice, brittle as old lace, called me inside. But I stayed rooted, my bare feet burning against the warped boards, knowing that his leaving wasn't just a trip to the mill. It was the beginning of an unraveling, a thread pulled loose that would undo everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and the weight of a promise. Edenville was a town of whispers and wisteria, where the church bells rang louder than the truth. Our house sat at the edge of Colored Town, as folks called it then, a place where black families like mine carved out lives under the watchful eyes of a world that loved our labor but not our laughter. The streets were lined with shotgun houses painted in fading pastels, their porches sagging under the weight of stories nobody dared tell. Beyond our neighborhood, the white folks' homes gleamed with fresh paint and promises of a future we could only dream of. But even in our corner, there was beauty, jasmine climbing the fences, the hum of gospel from the church on Sunday mornings, the way neighbors shared collards and secrets over backyard fences. It was home, but it was also a cage, and I was starting to feel its bars. That summer of 1962, I was a girl on the cusp, all elbows and dreams, with a heart too big for the world I lived in. I'd always been told I had my grandmother's eyes, dark, searching, like they could see through lies. Maybe that's why I felt it before I saw it, the shadow creeping over our family. Daddy had been different for months, his laughter replaced by silences that hung heavy as storm clouds. Mama said he was just tired, working double shifts at the textile mill to keep us fed. But I saw the way his hands shook when he thought no one was watching, the way he'd stare at the horizon like it held answers we couldn't give him. The night before he left, I overheard them arguing through the thin walls of our house. Mama's voice was sharp, pleading. "You can't do this, James." Not to her. Not to me. Daddy's reply was low, a rumble of defeat. "I ain't got a choice, Lila. You know that." I pressed my ear to the wall, my heart pounding, but the words blurred into the hum of cicadas outside. I didn't understand then what he meant, but I felt the weight of it, like a stone sinking in my chest. When I woke at dawn, his boots were gone, his coat missing from the hook by the door. Mama didn't cry, not in front of me. She just handed me a plate of biscuits and said, "Eat, Eleanor. Life don't stop for nobody." Life didn't stop, but it changed. The neighbors noticed Daddy's absence, their glances sharp as thorns when I walked to the corner store for Mama. Mrs. Jenkins, who braided my hair on Sundays, pulled me close one afternoon and whispered, "You hold your head high, child. Ain't your shame to carry?" I nodded, but shame has a way of sticking, like sweat on skin. At school, the other kids whispered behind their hands, their eyes darting to me when they thought I wasn't looking. I kept my chin up, my grandmother's eyes fierce, but inside, I was crumbling. Daddy had been my hero, the man who'd lift me onto his shoulders and point to the stars, promising I'd touch them one day. Now he was gone, and I didn't know why. Mama tried to fill the void, her hands always busy, sewing, cooking, scrubbing floors for white folks across town. But her eyes were hollow, her smiles forced. One night, as we sat shelling peas on the porch, she looked at me and said, "Eleanor, don't you ever let a man make you small. You hear me?" Her voice was fierce, but there was a tremble in it, like she was trying to convince herself too. I nodded, the pea slipping through my fingers, but I didn't understand, not yet. I was too busy chasing the ghost of Daddy, wondering what I'd done to make him leave. The truth came in fragments, like a puzzle I didn't want to solve. A week after he left, I found a letter tucked under Mama's Bible, the paper worn thin from her reading it. I shouldn't have looked, but curiosity is a powerful thing. The words were scrawled in Daddy's uneven hand, "Lila, I'm sorry. I can't stay. The debt's too big, and they'll come for me. Take care of our girl." Debt. The word felt foreign, heavy. I didn't know what it meant, not really, but I knew it was a monster big enough to chase my father away. I slipped the letter back, my hands trembling, and never told Mama I'd seen it. But it lived in me, a secret that grew thorns. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of sorrow, I walked to the church alone. Reverend Thomas was there, sweeping the steps, his face kind but weary. He'd known me since I was a baby, baptized me in the river behind the church. "What's troublin' you, Eleanor?" he asked, leaning on his broom. I didn't know how to answer, so I just stood there, my throat tight. He looked at me, his eyes soft, and said, "God don't give us more than we can bear, child. But He don't carry it for us either. That's on you." His words stayed with me, a seed planted in the dark soil of my heart. I didn't know then how much I'd need them, how they'd become the roots of my survival. That night, I lay in bed, the cicadas singing their endless song, and made a promise to myself. I'd find a way to be strong, not just for Mama, but for the girl I wanted to be. Daddy's leaving had cracked something in me, but it hadn't broken me, not yet. I didn't know what lay ahead, the betrayals and losses still waiting in the shadows. But I felt the stirrings of something fierce, something that whispered I was more than my pain. Edenville might have been a cage, but I was learning to sharpen my wings. The summer bled into fall, and Edenville draped itself in shades of amber and rust, the air sharp with the promise of change. But inside our house, time felt stuck, like a clock with a broken spring. Mama moved through her days with a quiet determination, her hands never idle, but her eyes carried a grief she wouldn't name. I watched her closely, searching for cracks in her armor, terrified I'd find one too deep to mend. At 16, I was old enough to feel the weight of her silence but too young to carry it. So I carried my own instead, the secret of Daddy's letter burning in my chest like a coal that wouldn't cool. Our neighborhood pulsed with its own rhythm, children laughing in the streets, the clatter of pots from open windows, the low hum of spirituals drifting from porches at dusk. But beneath the warmth, there was a current of judgment, a town that loved you until you gave it a reason not to. Daddy's absence was a stain, and I felt it every time I passed the corner store, where Mr. Carter's eyes lingered a beat too long, or when the church ladies whispered behind their fans. "Poor Lila," they'd say, their voices dripping with pity. And that girl, Eleanor, with no daddy to guide her. I wanted to scream that we didn't need their pity, that Mama was stronger than all of them combined, but I swallowed the words. Pride was a luxury we couldn't afford. School became my refuge, a place where I could lose myself in books and numbers, where the world felt bigger than Edenville's narrow streets. Miss Thompson, my English teacher, saw something in me, a spark, she called it. She'd keep me after class, slipping me novels by Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes, their words like windows to a world where black folks could be bold, broken, and beautiful all at once. "You've got a mind, Eleanor," she'd say, her glasses slipping down her nose. "Don't let this town dim it." Her faith in me was a lifeline, but it also scared me. What if I wasn't as bright as she thought? What if I was just a girl with a runaway father and a mother who was fading? At home, the cracks in our life widened. Mama took on extra work, cleaning houses for white families across the tracks, her hands red and raw from bleach. She'd come home late, her shoulders bowed, and I'd heat up leftovers, trying to make her smile. One night, as we sat at the kitchen table, the bulb overhead flickering, she looked at me and said, "Eleanor, you gotta be better than me. You hear? Don't let this world chew you up." Her voice was fierce, but her eyes were wet, and I realized she wasn't just talking about money or work. She was talking about survival, about the kind of strength that comes from burying your heart deep enough to keep it safe. I nodded, but the weight of her words pressed against me. I wanted to ask about Daddy, about the debt he'd mentioned in the letter, but fear stopped me. What if the truth was worse than the not knowing? Instead, I threw myself into helping her, taking on odd jobs, mending clothes for neighbors, sweeping the church steps for Reverend Thomas. Every penny I earned went into the jar on the kitchen counter, a silent promise to keep us afloat. But money couldn't fill the hole Daddy left, and it couldn't stop the rumors that started to swirl. It was Mrs. Jenkins who told me, her voice low as she braided my hair one Sunday. "Folks sayin' your daddy didn't just leave, Eleanor. They say he got mixed up with bad people, gamblin' debts he couldn't pay. Her hand stilled, and I felt her eyes on me, waiting for a reaction. I kept my face blank, but inside, my heart raced. Gambling? Daddy? The man who'd taught me to fish in the river, who'd sung hymns with a voice like thunder. It didn't fit, but the letter's words echoed in my mind, the debt's too big. I thanked Mrs. Jenkins and left, my head spinning. Was that why he'd run? To protect us from his mistakes? Or was it cowardice, plain and simple? The truth came crashing down one October evening, when the air was crisp and the sky burned red. I was walking home from the church, my arms full of hymnals I'd been asked to organize, when I saw a man leaning against our fence. He was tall, white, with a face like a hawk, sharp and hungry. His suit was too clean for our dusty street, and his eyes locked on me like I was prey. "You Lila's girl?" he asked, his voice smooth but cold. I nodded, my throat tight. "Tell your mama Mr. Grayson's waitin' on what's owed. She'll know what I mean." He tipped his hat and walked away, his shadow stretching long behind him. I ran inside, the hymnals forgotten on the porch. Mama was at the stove, stirring greens, but her face changed when I told her about the man. "Go to your room, Eleanor," she said, her voice flat. "This ain't for you." But I didn't move. "Is it about Daddy's debt?" I asked, the words spilling out before I could stop them. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with something like fear. "What you know about that?" she demanded. I told her about the letter, my voice shaking, and for the first time I saw my mother break. She sank into a chair, her hands covering her face, and sobbed, deep, wrenching sobs that tore through me. When she finally spoke, her voice was raw. "Your daddy got in deep with men like Grayson. Gamblin', borrowin' money he couldn't pay back. They threatened us, Eleanor. Said they'd take the house, hurt us. He left to keep them away, but they ain't done with us." I stood there, frozen, the world I'd known crumbling. Daddy hadn't just abandoned us, he'd left us to face his demons. Anger surged through me, hot and bitter, but so did something else, resolve. I knelt beside Mama, taking her hands. "We'll figure it out," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Together." That night, I lay awake, the weight of her words sinking in. The debt wasn't just money, it was a chain, binding us to a past we didn't choose. But I refused to let it define us. I thought of Reverend Thomas's words, about carrying my own burdens, and Miss Thompson's belief in my spark. They were right, I had to be more than my pain. I didn't know how we'd face Mr. Grayson or the debt, but I knew one thing, I wouldn't let Mama fight alone. The cicadas sang outside, their song a reminder that life kept moving, and so would I, one determined step at a time. Winter came to Edenville like a guest who'd overstayed their welcome, the air biting and the sky a relentless gray. Frost clung to the magnolias, turning their leaves brittle, and our little house felt colder than ever, as if the chill had settled into the walls themselves. Mama and I moved through our days like dancers in a wary duet, each step careful, each glance heavy with the unspoken. Mr. Grayson's visit had cracked something open between us, a truth we couldn't unsee. Daddy's sins were ours to bear, and they carried a price we didn't yet know how to pay. At 16, I was learning that love could be a burden as much as a bomb, but I clung to it anyway, determined to hold us together. The town seemed to sense our vulnerability, its whispers growing sharper. At church, the ladies' pitying looks turned to sidelong glances, as if Mama's struggle was a stain they might catch. Even Mrs. Jenkins, usually so warm, spoke in hushed tones about that poor Whitmore family when she thought I couldn't hear. I wanted to shout that we weren't broken, that we were fighting, but words felt useless against the tide of gossip. Instead, I poured my energy into action, taking on more work, babysitting for neighbors, cleaning the church after services, anything to add to the jar on the kitchen counter. Every clink of a coin was a defiance, a promise that we wouldn't drown. Mama, too, fought in her own way. She worked longer hours, her hands cracked from scrubbing floors, her face etched with exhaustion. But there was a fire in her I hadn't seen before, a quiet ferocity that surfaced when she thought I wasn't looking. One night, as I mended a neighbor's dress by lamplight, I overheard her on the phone, her voice low but fierce. "I ain't got it yet, Mr. Grayson, but you'll get your money. Don't you come near my girl." The receiver clicked, and she stood still, her back to me, shoulders trembling. I didn't say anything, but I felt a surge of pride and fear. Mama was a lion, but even lions tire. School remained my sanctuary, though it, too, was changing. The civil rights movement was stirring, its ripples reaching even our small town. Miss Thompson spoke of it in class, her voice steady but charged, reading us articles about sit-ins and marches. "Change is coming, children," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "But it starts with courage." Her words lit something in me, a spark that felt both dangerous and necessary. I began to see Edenville differently, not just as a cage, but as a battleground, where every step forward was a fight. I carried that spark home, letting it warm me against the cold of our reality. But reality had a way of biting back. One January afternoon, as I walked home from school, my breath clouding in the air, I saw Mr. Grayson again. He was parked across the street from our house, his car sleek and out of place in our dusty neighborhood. He didn't approach, just watched, his eyes like a hawk's, pinning me in place. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to keep walking, my chin high. When I got inside, I told Mama, and her face hardened. "Stay away from him, Eleanor," she said, her voice sharp. "He's trouble." I nodded, but trouble was already at our door, and I knew ignoring it wouldn't make it go away. That evening, I went to Reverend Thomas for advice, my footsteps crunching on the frozen grass. The church was quiet, its pews empty, the air heavy with the scent of polished wood and old hymnals. He was in his office, writing a sermon, but he set his pen down when I knocked. "What's on your mind, child?" he asked, his voice warm but searching. I told him about Mr. Grayson, about Mama's fear, about the debt I didn't fully understand. The words spilled out, raw and unfiltered, and when I finished, I felt lighter, but no less afraid. He leaned back, his eyes thoughtful. "Eleanor, the Bible says we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers. Mr. Grayson's just a man, but he's carrying a darkness bigger than himself. You and your mama, you gotta fight that darkness with light, truth, faith, and a whole lot of grit." He smiled, but it was a warrior's smile, not a soft one. "You're stronger than you know, girl. Don't forget it." His words settled into me, not as comfort, but as a challenge. I left the church with a fire in my belly, determined to face whatever came next. The next day, I made a decision. I couldn't wait for Mr. Grayson to strike again, I had to know what we were up against. After school, I went to the library, a small brick building on the edge of town where Miss Thompson sometimes sent me for research. The librarian, Miss Clara, was a stern woman with a soft spot for curious kids. I asked her if she could help me find anything about debts or loan sharks, keeping my voice low. She raised an eyebrow but led me to a stack of old newspapers and legal books. "Be careful what you dig for, Eleanor," she said. "Some truths cut deep." For hours, I pored over articles about men like Mr. Grayson, loan sharks who preyed on desperate families, charging interest that choked you like a noose. I learned about liens, foreclosures, and the kind of deals that trapped people like Daddy. The more I read, the angrier I got, not just at Daddy, but at a world that let men like Grayson thrive. I copied down terms and numbers, my hands shaking, and tucked the notes into my pocket. Knowledge was a weapon, and I was arming myself. When I got home, Mama was at the stove, her back stiff. I wanted to tell her what I'd found, but her silence stopped me. Instead, I slipped into my room and hid the notes under my mattress, next to Daddy's letter. That night, as the wind howled outside, I prayed for the first time in months, not for Daddy to come back, but for strength to protect Mama, to protect us. I didn't know if God was listening, but the act of praying felt like defiance, like staking a claim on my own resilience. By February, the tension in our house was a living thing, coiling tighter with each passing day. Mama started locking the doors at dusk, her eyes darting to the windows. I kept working, kept studying, kept watching for Mr. Grayson's car. One evening, as we ate cornbread and beans in silence, I reached for her hand. "We're gonna make it, Mama," I said, my voice steady. She looked at me, her eyes softening, and squeezed my hand back. "I know, baby," she whispered. "I know." In that moment, I felt the fire within me flare brighter. Mr. Grayson might have thought he had us cornered, but he didn't know Eleanor Whitmore, not yet. I was learning to carry my burdens, to sharpen my wings against the bars of Edenville's cage. The fight was just beginning, and I was ready to meet it, one fierce step at a time. Spring crept into Edenville with a tentative grace, the magnolias blooming in defiant bursts of white against the lingering chill. The air carried the scent of damp earth and new beginnings, but in our house, the weight of winter's secrets pressed heavier than ever. Mama and I were soldiers in a silent war, our days marked by vigilance, locked doors, lowered voices, eyes scanning the street for Mr. Grayson's sleek car. At 17, I was no longer the girl who'd stood frozen on the porch, watching Daddy's truck vanish. I was sharper now, my heart a blade honed by betrayal and necessity. But sharpness comes at a cost, and I was learning that even the strongest steel can crack under pressure. The town buzzed with its usual rhythm, children chasing fireflies at dusk, the clink of bottles at the corner store, the fervent amens from Sunday services. But beneath the surface, Edenville was shifting. The civil rights movement was no longer a distant whisper, it was a drumbeat, growing louder. At school, Miss Thompson showed us grainy newsreels of marchers in Selma, their faces resolute despite the batons and hoses. "This is your fight, too," she told us, her voice trembling with conviction. I felt it in my bones, a call to stand taller, but my fight was closer to home. Mr. Grayson was our oppressor, his shadow a chain we couldn't yet break. Mama was fraying, though she hid it well. Her hands, once steady, shook as she poured coffee, and her laughter, rare as it was, had vanished entirely. She'd taken on a second job, cooking for a white family across town, leaving before dawn and returning after dark. I'd wait up, reheating greens or cornbread, trying to coax a smile from her. One night, as we sat in the flickering light of our kitchen, she looked at me and said, "Eleanor, I'm tired. Bone tired. But I ain't given up. Not for you." Her voice was a vow, but her eyes were haunted, and I knew she was carrying more than she'd tell me. I carried my own burdens, the notes from the library a constant weight in my mind. I'd learned enough to know Mr. Grayson wasn't just a lone shark, he was a predator, part of a network that thrived on desperation. His kind offered quick cash with smiles, then tightened the noose with interest rates that could choke a family in months. Daddy had fallen into that trap, and now we were collateral. I hadn't told Mama about my research, afraid it would break her further, but I shared it with Reverend Thomas one evening, sitting in the church's quiet sanctuary. He listened, his face grave, as I explained what I'd found, articles about foreclosures, stories of families ruined by men like Grayson. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He leaned forward, his hands clasped. "You fight smart, Eleanor. Not with fists, but with truth. Grayson's power comes from fear. Take that away, and he's just a man." He paused, his eyes searching mine. "But you gotta be ready for what comes when you stand up. It won't be easy." His words were a warning and a charge, and I left the church with a plan forming, fragile but fierce. That plan was tested sooner than I expected. One March afternoon, as I walked home from school, I saw Mr. Grayson's car parked in our yard. My heart lurched, but I forced myself to keep moving, my steps deliberate. He was on our porch, talking to Mama, his voice smooth as oil. "Time's runnin' out, Lila," he was saying as I approached. "You know what happens if you don't pay." Mama stood rigid, her arms crossed, but I saw the fear in her eyes. I stepped between them, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. "Leave her alone, Mr. Grayson. We'll get your money." His eyes narrowed, a snake sizing up its prey. "Bold little thing, ain't you?" he said, a smirk curling his lips. "Tell your mama to hurry up, or I'll take more than money." He tipped his hat and sauntered to his car, leaving a chill in his wake. Mama grabbed my arm, pulling me inside. "What were you thinking, Eleanor?" she hissed, her voice shaking. "You don't talk to men like that." But I shook my head, anger burning through my fear. "He doesn't scare me, Mama. We can't keep running. That night, we had our first real fight. Mama wanted to pay Grayson whatever we had, even if it meant losing the house. "It's just a house," she said, her voice desperate. "You're what matters." But I refused. "It's not just a house," I snapped. "It's ours. Daddy already took enough. I won't let Grayson take this too." She stared at me, her eyes wide, and for a moment, I thought she'd slap me. Instead, she sank into a chair, her face crumpling. "I can't lose you, Eleanor," she whispered. I knelt beside her, my anger softening. "You won't," I said. "But we gotta fight smarter." The next day, I went to Miss Thompson, my heart racing. She'd always told me knowledge was power, and I needed hers now. In her classroom, after the other students left, I told her everything: Daddy's debt, Grayson's threats, my library notes. Her face tightened, but she didn't hesitate. "We need help," she said, pulling out a notepad. She wrote down a name: Mr. Ellis, a lawyer in Charleston who worked with black families facing predatory lenders. "He's fought men like Grayson before," she said. "But it'll cost money, and it'll be risky." I nodded, my resolve hardening. "We'll find a way." Miss Thompson became our ally, connecting us with Mr. Ellis and helping me draft a letter outlining Grayson's threats. She also taught me about community, how Edenville's strength lay in its people, not its gossip. With her encouragement, I started talking to neighbors, carefully at first, asking if they'd dealt with men like Grayson. To my surprise, many had: Mrs. Jenkins, whose brother lost his farm; Mr. Carter, whose cousin faced foreclosure. Their stories fueled my anger but also my hope. We weren't alone. By April, the air was thick with pollen and possibility. Mr. Ellis agreed to take our case, working pro bono after Miss Thompson vouched for us. He warned that fighting Grayson would mean exposing Daddy's mistakes publicly, but Mama, after days of silence, agreed. "I'm done hidin'," she said, her voice steady for the first time in months. We met with neighbors at the church, Reverend Thomas leading the charge, and formed a plan to confront Grayson legally, pooling resources and testimonies. The breaking point came one humid evening, when Grayson showed up at our door, his smirk gone, replaced by a scowl. "You think you can outsmart me?" he spat, his voice low. "You'll regret this." Mama stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "Get off my property," she said, her voice a blade. I stood beside her, my heart pounding but my stance firm. He left, but his threat lingered, a storm cloud on the horizon. That night, I lay awake, the cicadas' song a reminder of the battles ahead. We'd taken a stand, but the fight was far from over. Yet in the darkness, I felt a shift within me, a fire not just of anger, but of purpose. Mama and I were no longer just surviving, we were fighting, together, for a future we could claim. Edenville's cage was cracking, and I was ready to soar. Summer returned to Edenville with a vengeance, the heat a heavy hand pressing down on the town. The magnolias drooped, their petals curling in surrender, and the air shimmered with the hum of cicadas and unspoken truths. Our little house stood defiant, its faded paint a testament to Mama's resolve and mine, but the shadow of Mr. Grayson loomed larger than ever. At 17, I was no longer a girl chasing ghosts, I was a warrior, armed with knowledge and a community that had finally found its voice. Yet victory was not assured, and the cost of our fight was becoming clearer with each passing day. The town was alive with tension, its rhythm disrupted by the growing murmur of resistance. Our meetings at the church had swelled, neighbors crowding the pews to share stories of Grayson's predation, families forced from homes, savings drained by impossible debts. Reverend Thomas called it a reckoning, his sermons now laced with a fire that matched the summer sun. "We are not prey," he thundered one Sunday, his eyes sweeping over us. "We are God's children, and we will stand." I felt his words in my chest, a drumbeat urging me forward, but I also saw the fear in Mama's eyes, the weight of what we'd unleashed. Mama had changed since our confrontation with Grayson. Her hand still shook, but there was a steel in her spine, a quiet strength that surfaced in small ways, locking eyes with neighbors who'd once whispered about us, speaking up at church meetings, signing her name to Mr. Ellis's legal documents. She was no longer just surviving, she was reclaiming her dignity. But the strain was evident. Late at night, I'd hear her pacing, muttering prayers or curses, and I knew she feared what Grayson might do next. "He ain't the kind to back down," she told me one evening, her voice low as we shelled peas on the porch. "Men like him fight dirty." I nodded, my own fear a knot in my stomach, but I refused to let it rule me. Mr. Ellis was building a case, gathering testimonies from across Edenville and beyond. He'd uncovered records of Grayson's dealings, liens filed against dozens of families, interest rates that violated state laws, threats that bordered on extortion. "He's sloppy," Mr. Ellis said during a visit to the church, his glasses glinting in the lamplight. "But he's connected. We need to be airtight." His words were a reminder that our fight wasn't just against one man, but a system that let him thrive. School was a distant hum, my senior year overshadowed by the battle at home. Miss Thompson remained my anchor, slipping me books on justice and resilience, her classroom a safe harbor. One afternoon, she pulled me aside, her face serious. "Eleanor, you're carrying a lot," she said, her voice soft. "Don't let it dim your light." I wanted to tell her my light was flickering, that anger and fear were heavy burdens, but I just nodded. Her belief in me was a lifeline, and I clung to it, determined to prove her right. The reckoning came in late July, when the air was so thick you could taste it. Mr. Ellis called a meeting at the church, his briefcase bulging with documents. The pews were packed, neighbors shoulder to shoulder, their faces a mix of hope and dread. He laid out the plan, a class action lawsuit against Grayson, accusing him of usury and coercion. "We have enough to hurt him," he said, his voice steady. "But he'll fight back. Expect intimidation, maybe worse." Mama gripped my hand, her palm clammy, and I squeezed back, my heart racing. This was our stand, and there was no turning back. Grayson's retaliation was swift. 2 days later, I came home to find our front door splattered with red paint, the word debt scrawled in jagged letters. Mama stood on the porch, her face a mask of fury, a bucket of soapy water at her feet. "He thinks this'll scare us," she said, scrubbing at the paint. "He's wrong." I joined her, my hands trembling but my resolve firm. Neighbors came to help, their presence a silent vow, we were in this together. That night, I lay awake, Grayson's threat echoing in my mind, but I also felt a surge of pride. We were fighting, not just for us, but for everyone he'd hurt. The lawsuit moved forward, each step a battle. Grayson's lawyers tried to discredit our witnesses, calling them troublemakers and liars. They dug into Daddy's past, painting him as a reckless gambler who'd brought this on us. The courtroom was a white man's world, its air thick with skepticism, but Mr. Ellis was relentless, presenting evidence with a calm precision that silenced doubts. Mama testified, her voice steady as she recounted Grayson's threats, and I watched, awestruck, as she faced down a room of strangers with the courage of a lion. I testified too, my voice shaking at first but growing stronger. I spoke of Grayson's visits, his smirks, the fear he'd sown in our home. I spoke of Daddy, not to excuse him, but to humanize him, a man who'd made mistakes but didn't deserve to be erased. The judge, an older white man with tired eyes, listened, his pen scratching notes. When I finished, Miss Thompson, sitting in the back, gave me a nod, her eyes shining with pride. I felt exposed, but also unburdened, as if speaking the truth had loosened a chain around my heart. By August, the tide began to turn. Newspapers picked up the story, calling Grayson a modern-day loan shark. Protesters gathered outside his office in Charleston, their signs demanding justice. Edenville's whispers became roars, neighbors no longer hiding their anger. Grayson's allies distanced themselves, his empire cracking under scrutiny. One evening, Mr. Ellis called with news. Grayson had offered a settlement, forgiving our debt and others, in exchange for dropping the suit. Mama and I sat at the kitchen table, the weight of the decision pressing down. "We could end it," Mama said, her voice weary. "Be free." But I shook my head. Free ain't enough, I said. He needs to answer for what he's done. She looked at me, her eyes searching, and then nodded. You're right, baby. Let's finish this. We rejected the settlement, pushing for a trial that would expose Grayson fully. It was a risk, but it felt like justice, like a fire we'd kindled together. As summer waned, I stood on our porch, the paint stains faded but still visible, a reminder of our fight. The cicadas sang, their song no longer a lament but a call to keep going. Mama and I were scarred, but we were standing, our bond forged anew in the crucible of this battle. I thought of Reverend Thomas's words about light and darkness, of Miss Thompson's faith in my spark. The reckoning wasn't over, but I was ready for it, my heart aflame that no shadow could extinguish.